Hi, this is Charlie Crimebuster. Well, 2024 has just started, and it leads off with a blockbuster in true crime. George and Cindy Anthony take a lie detector test. We're going to talk about that on today's Charlie Crimebuster. Yep, it's what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show, and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster or Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another podcast of Charlie Crimebuster. Glad to have you on board the Charlie Crime train today. And today we're going to be talking about, George and Cindy Anthony, who took a lie detector test. We're going to cover the timeline of the crime. We're going to talk about the testimony of Casey Anthony. Now, if you recall, Casey Anthony did not testify in the trial, but she did testify through a documentary that took place on Peacock. We're going to tell you all about what she said her side of the story was in this case. And then we're going to tell you exactly what happened at the lie detector test. So here's a spoiler alert. If you haven't seen that documentary about the lie detector tests, you're going to hear all about it right here on Charlie Crimebuster. So thank you for joining us. Hey, we'd like to invite all of our listeners, both past and new ones. We have thousands and thousands of downloads, and we're humbled by that. But if you're a new listener, we'd like to invite you to reach out with a shout-out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster, at gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. Whether you're a new listener or you've been listening for a long time, I always love to hear from people that are a part of the podcast. Again, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. If you'd like to support the program, we invite you to go to peacemakernetwork.com, peacemakernetwork.com. There you can become a supporter of the program. You read all about it right there at peacemakernetwork.com. And if you'd like to get caught up on any of the Charlie episodes, including a whole bunch about the Casey Anthony case, we'll go on over to charliecrimebuster.com. That's simple, charliecrimebuster.com. I'm going to make it very simple for you, and all these that we've just mentioned here in the welcome, we're going to put it in the show notes. All you got to do is just go over there and just click. Just click. You can get right there to give us a shout out. You can get right there to become a supporter. You can get right there to find more episodes. So thank you for joining us in this brand new year. So now it's coming up on about 16 years now, and this case still grabs headlines. Isn't that amazing? Because now the parents of that person who was once known as the most hated mom in America, well, George and Anthony, they both consented and taken a lie detector test about their parts in the crime, alleged parts in the crime, I should say. But in order for you to understand, I think it's very important for you to get a little timeline of exactly what happened. It was way back in 2008. Well, the world was captivated by the bizarre behavior displayed by Casey Anthony. Casey was then 22 years of age, and she was a single mother from here in Orlando, Florida. And boy, I tell you, she actually spun a web of lies to cover up the disappearance of her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee, back that summer in 2008. Even Facebook became a part of her trial, as pictures of her partying all around town the whole time her daughter was missing. Of course, that brought fuel to the charges of first-degree murder. That was even before little Kaylee's body was discovered in a little swamp just down the road from her house. But there would be no closure for those who were outraged by the mother's neglect of her child. No closure, I say, because, believe it or not, even with all of the evidence, Casey escaped conviction back in 2011. And then those questions of who killed her young daughter and why she was killed, well, they were really never resolved. Someone asked you, will the fact now that the parents who have alleged to have a part in this crime, now that they've taken a lie detector test, will that bring closure to some? Well, we're going to tell you about that a little later on the program. But let's talk again about the timeline. You actually have to go back to August the 9th, 2005. That's when Kaylee Marie Anthony was born. But even then, there was, concern regarding the mom's behavior. You see, Casey, she denied her pregnancy over and over again. And little Kaylee, she arrives even after Casey's repeated denials to other family members about her pregnancy. Then, she actually suggests, possible partners who might be the father. That included her fiancé, Jesse, and another young man who supposedly died in a car accident. And yet the identity of Kaylee's father was never really publicly revealed. Even in her own testimony, when she testified through a documentary called Where the Truth Lies, something like that, Casey then, she tells even another story. She says that actually that little Kaylee was a product of her being raped. That was the way that Kaylee was conceived. The little girl who was loved by her grandparents, and even Casey was reported by many to be a loving mother, she was actually conceived by a rape, according again to Casey, who, surprise, 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 has been known to tell lie after lie after lie. So, little Kaylee was born. She was there living in the home of George and Cindy Anthony, along with her mother, Casey. And then on June the 16th, 2008, there was kind of an argument about the day before, and so Casey drives off with little Kaylee. And little Kaylee at that point was never seen by anybody again alive. For 31 days, there was no sight of little Kaylee. And then it was on July the 15th that not Casey, who is Kaylee's mother, reports her missing, but Cindy, Kaylee's grandmother, reports her missing. And that was after learning that the family car that was used by Casey, that car had been impounded. And when George went to get the car, he was overwhelmed by smell that remained in the car even after a bag of trash was removed from the trunk. So Cindy, who now by this point is going mad because she can't find her granddaughter, has been missing for 31 days, who usually lived at home with them, she tracks down her daughter later that day. There's a whole bunch of 911 calls. She reports that Kaylee has been missing for a month, and she demands her own daughter's arrest. And she also takes note of that odor that was in the vehicle. And this is what she says. Listen very carefully, and I'm quoting it. She said, "It smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." Now, July the 16th, the next day, they actually arrest Casey. And she then leads investigators on a pair of wild goose chases. First, to the so-called apartment of a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. By the way, she became known as Zanny the Nanny. Only to find that apparently she never existed. And alongside that, there was a pretend job that Casey told investigators and everybody else that she had been going to month after month after month after month, and that job, you got it, it never existed either. She even led investigators all the way over there to where the alleged job was supposed to be, only to find that she never had a job there doing what she said that she did. So now, Casey, little Kaylee's mom, she becomes, quote, an official person of interest in the case. So there's a bond hearing. And in that bond hearing, there is evidence that is actually presented during the bond hearing that a cadaver dog had zeroed in on the odor of a dying human being in the car trunk, the body decomposing, and also the dog hit on the backyard. So even though Casey's been held on relatively minor charges at this point, they've not charged her with murder, the judge is disturbed enough by the evidence that he actually sets the bail at a whopping $500,000. And then this case gets even more weird, because a California bounty hunter by the name of Leonard Padilla, he comes around and says that he's going to pay, and he did pay the $500,000. And he says that he paid that bond all the way from California, came here to Orlando with the hope that Casey would lead them to Kaylee. He was disappointed. And 10 days later, just 10 days later, on August the 30th, he rescinds the bond. And the so-called bounty hunter, who I say never saw a camera he did not like, he says, quote, "I came, I gave it my best shot. She didn't want to talk to me. What can I say?" Then on October the 14th, well, Casey now is charged with more serious crimes. She's charged with first-degree murder. And that unsealed indictment, it also charged her with aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. Now, by this time, Casey has a lawyer, Jose Baez. Hardly ever heard from at that time, but now he's a household name. Jose Baez says that his client's actions will become clearer at trial, and he says, quote, "I sincerely believe when we have finally spoken, everyone, and I mean everyone, will sit back and say, now I understand. That explains it, why this mother was partying all around town while her daughter was missing." Well, some people did buy it. Some people did think that they understood it. Those people were the jury. But I'm getting ahead of myself. October the 24th, there's more evidence about an examination of the car. And then on December the 11th, well, sadly, the skeletal remains of a little young girl was found in a wooded area less than half a mile from the Anthony's home. And then on December the 20th, those remains, unfortunately, were confirmed to be those of little Kaylee. Now, interesting enough, at first, the Orange County Chief Medical Examiner reported that the bones showed no evidence of trauma. She ruled the death as a homicide of undetermined means. Now, that's puzzling to a lot of us because the skull was actually found with duct tape around the nose, the mouth, and the jaw. And it had decomposed, even to the point that investigators could not really pinpoint an exact cause and date of death. Now, something else happened during this time that you may be surprised about, and that was that George, Casey's father, was actually taken into custody. But no, hold on. Wasn't because they thought he had anything to do with little Kaylee's death and missing time, that nobody knew where the little body was. He wasn't taken in custody because of his involvement in that, but he was taken into custody because he had attempted suicide. He was taken into custody on January the 23rd, 2009, of course, for his own protection. Now, this brings even more speculation that he was somehow tied to the murder of little Kaylee. That is why this lie detector test is so important. April 13th, 2009, well, they say now they're going to go for the death penalty. First they weren't, but now, because of aggravating circumstances, they add the death penalty to the table. And then on May the 24th, that trial starts. Well, it starts with the prosecution saying that Casey was just a party girl, going around, had no use for a young daughter. She went that whole month that the daughter was missing, she was shopping and drinking and partying, as though nothing else was happening in the entire world. And so everybody's ready for this case to start, and then boom, Baez has a stunning opening statement. And in that opening statement, he says Kaylee wasn't murdered, but she accidentally drowned in the family pool, and that George Anthony sought to cover up the accidental death. And then, hold on to your hat, then Baez alleges that George had molested Casey, and that was why she had this habit of lying about where little Kaylee was, lying about Zanny the nanny, lying about a make-up belief job, that she had that habit of lying all along because she had to constantly cover up the pain that comes from being sexually abused. Well, the first witness is George, and he denies that he ever molested his daughter or that he knew anything about Kaylee drowning. And then a whole bunch of witnesses comes to the stand. They even bring somebody from Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, back there where part of the atomic bomb was put together. And he explained that there was a shocking high amount of chloroform found in the body or the back of that vehicle. That chloroform, of course, could be used to knock someone unconscious. It was detected in the car trunk. And that led to his conclusion, Mr. Vass of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, that there was indeed a dead body in the trunk of that car. However, that testimony was contradicted the following day by an FBI scientist. He compared the chloroform level to that was found in household cleaners. So you can see where this goes. One side gets one group of experts, the other side gets the other group of experts. And then something else that came about was that someone had searched for chloroform. A software designer said on the family computer that chloroform was searched for a whopping 84 times. But then later, toward the end of the trial, designer says, we made a mistake. It was actually only visited one time for chloroform. Well, it was a humdinger of a trial, and you can hear a lot more about that if you want to go back to charliecrimebuster.com, find out a lot more about it. So these two sides, they're both presented in the arguments. And then the jury goes and they are deliberating. But now get this. Get this. After 6 weeks of testimony, over 400 pieces of evidence presented to the court, the jury, that had 7 women, 5 men, they took less than 11 hours. 11 hours to reach a verdict. 6 weeks testimony. 400 pieces of evidence. Only 11 hours of deliberation. They get the verdict. Most people think for sure it's going to be guilty, but had their socks knocked off of them because the jury said not guilty. Then Casey, she's sentenced to time already served, and she's released from jail. That's the timeline. Next, we're going to talk about the testimony of Casey. We know what the prosecution said that happened, that she just got rid of her child because she wanted to party. But what does Casey say about all of that? She did not testify at trial, but she did testify through a documentary on Peacock. We're going to tell you what she said, and then we're going to tell you about the tests. But now it's time for what we call our Crazy Crook story. Kind of lightens the load of what we share from time to time on the podcast. This one involves a crazy crook. So our Crazy Crook story today involves a guy who was involved in a robbery. But this crazy crook, instead of having his own getaway car, he can't make it up. He called an Uber. Police were alerted to it, and so they found him waiting on his Uber, and they said, "Are you looking for an Uber?" That's what an officer can be heard asking the suspect in body cam footage shared by the police department. And the guy, he was wearing a hood of a black sweatshirt. He had a scarf around him. Shoots his gaze sideways, hides his hands inside his pocket. And police said that the would-be burglar, a guy by the name of Jose, used an Uber as a getaway vehicle. When they asked him if he called for an Uber, he said, no. He then gives the officer a fake name, and then he takes several steps backward and away from the cops. Well, they grab him. But he says, oh, no, I wasn't trying to make a break for it. Well, that burglar was actually stealing plumbing from a store in Denver when he called an Uber driver to pick him up. He doubled down on his innocence, claims he's simply on his way to his mother's house. But when he was told that he matched the description of the thief, well, he continued to say he was not the man they were looking for. But the contents of his backpack said otherwise. In fact, they found over $8,600 worth of electric tools in his backpack. So, my friend, this crazy crook who steals tools from a Denver plumbing shop then turns around and calls an Uber for his getaway. This, my friend, indeed is Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, now back to our main focus. Now it's time to hear what Casey said actually took place. It was considered one of the first trials of the century. And, of course, it polarized conversation in living rooms all across America. And it is still one, by many means, people think, that leaves more questions than answers. There have actually been several movies, several documentaries to fill in the gaps, and yet the woman at the center of it all remained a big mystery. That is until this exclusive 3-part documentary series, where Casey Anthony tells her side of the story and addressed the public that had made so many assumptions for some 13 years. In this documentary, Casey blames her daughter's murder on that of her father, and she attempts to blame her own behavior on a lifetime of trauma and abuse. Just like she did at trial through her attorney, she accused her father and brother, George and Lee Anthony, of sexually abusing her. She argues that trauma explained her long pattern of lies that was in connection to her daughter's disappearance. Now, I should say that George Anthony denied those allegations on the witness stand, and he has continued to do so. However, there are still people who believe to this day that Casey Anthony and her attorney were right, that her weird behavior was a result of a family that kept secrets, and that secret was that George Anthony abused not only Casey, but even abused little Kaylee herself, and that he was the one responsible for her death and cover-up. No wonder this man considered taking his own life. So on the bomb buster of 2024, George now takes a lie detector test. And to me, this is a big, big deal. Now, there is a national agency that says that lie detectors, well, that it's correct 87.5% of the time. But yet I should say that courts today still will not allow such data to be entered. They do not consider it trustworthy. But they are still widely used for employment situations and other ways of searching for truthfulness. My friend, I got to tell you, there's a whole lot on the line here for George and Cindy should they fail the test. It could set him up for charges. You see, there's no statute of limitation on murder, even if it is unconclusive. In other words, if that test comes back unconclusive, which means we can't tell if it's true or not, then the public will run with that to add credibility to the story that George sexually abused both his daughter and granddaughter. So a whole lot is on the line regarding the credibility of George and Cindy Anthony. Both have been accused of not being truthful. But the question is, are they truthful about their involvement in the murder of their own granddaughter? As Casey has testified to the world in that documentary, George was involved. So George and his wife were questioned by former FBI examiner George Olivo about 2-year-old Kaylee's disappearance and death. Now, George is a skilled examiner. If I ever took such a test to reveal my truthfulness, I would want someone as skilled as him to be the examiner. There's no doubt in my mind that he would make sure of 2 things. Number 1, that the test would be fair, and number 2, that it would be truthful. The test would tell the truth. Let me say again, there's a lot at stake. At first, both of them faced a series of questions as a pretest to see if they were suitable participants. George had asked George Anthony, "You called yourself a 10 on the personal honesty scale. You didn't lie about that, right?" Well, George stumbled a little bit on his words, saying, "Yes, I didn't lie about that. I'm sorry. He had been asked whether he had ever had sexual contact with Casey or touched her for sexual gratification, and if any sexual contact with a minor had taken place. George was grilled about if he had any involvement in Kaylee's disappearance. He answered, my friend, no to all the questions, and the results came back saying that he told the truth. Cindy said on the special, "I've always believed you," she said as she was comforting George as he was crying. "I'll never forgive her," Cindy said of her daughter. You see, George has always denied allegations of sexually abusing Casey and denied having any involvement of Kaylee's disappearance. Now, in that recent special, Cindy claimed there was no physical way for George to have sexual intercourse in that room without her hearing it. Said that she was overprotective, always kept the doors open at the house. She went on to say, "I would have castrated him myself if I thought he did that." And Cindy also was found to have been truthful when she said George never confided in her or secretly confessed about any involvement in Kaylee's disappearance. My friend, that test said that George and Cindy Anthony were telling the truth. Now, even before that test, I shared with you what I called the smoking gun in the case, which I believe proved that Casey Anthony was guilty of killing her own daughter. If you want to review that episode, go on over to charliecrimebuster.com and you'll find that smoking gun episode. So, my friend, hopefully, the fact that they were found being truthful in this lie detector test will give George and Cindy some peace, though you and I both know nothing will ever bring back their precious granddaughter. Their granddaughter that they loved so much were a part of their lives. You see, they had helped raise her from birth to her tragic death in 2008. I hope that some way, somehow, this can bring closure to other people. If you were on the fence thinking, well, maybe George had something to do with this, I hope that this will move you to the other side of the fence, because there's no doubt in my mind that Casey Anthony was responsible for the death of her daughter. I believe she used chloroform to put her asleep. Maybe she wasn't intending to kill her. Maybe she just wanted her to go to sleep so she could go out and party. Maybe it was accidental in the fact that she used too much chloroform. Regardless, I believe she and she alone was responsible for the death of this precious little girl. And I think in this particular situation, justice was not handed out correctly. I think instead of Casey Anthony being free, I think she should be in prison. Or better yet, she should have faced the death penalty. Well, that's my take on it. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. Yep, for the life you save, it could be your very own.